Well, hi everybody, Father Alex here. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. I am the host of the Godcast. I'm also the vicar of St Matthew's Church in Burnley in the UK, and I'm also the author of the book Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar, a Priest Story. My guest today on the Godcast is Jason J. Smart. Jason is a political advisor who's had a long working relationship across the east of Europe, particularly Russia. And we're going to talk to him about the current situation there and how that's going to impact the rest of the world. So I do hope you enjoy this interview with Jason J. Smart. If you do, please do subscribe to my YouTube channel and do check out all the other interviews. There are literally hundreds of interviews there now with people from politics, from media, from music, and of course from the faith background as well. So do now please enjoy this interview with Jason J. Smart. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is Jason J. Smart. Jason, welcome to the Godcast. How are you?
Great to see you, Alex. Thank you.
How's the weather where you are today?
Just terrific. How are weather where you are?
Well, it's we've seen the early onset of spring, Jason. It's been a lovely day after quite a harsh spell of cold weather and rain. So it's optimistic. So that's probably the best way to describe it. So Jason, you are a man of many talents, but people in the UK may not be overtly familiar with your work. Just give us a little bit of context to what you do and how you engage in world politics, for example.
Well, at present, I'm working for the Kyiv Post. I write for the Kyiv Post as a journalist, and I also do interviews for them. But I also, aside from that, previous to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, I was working in political consulting. And in that capacity, I worked in a number of countries in Central Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, and other places. So I was bouncing around quite a bit. But since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, I've been mostly involved with that.
Just tell us a bit about your work before the conflict, Jason, and how you engage with such matters, of Russia and Ukraine.
So, I mean, I've been working on Russia and Ukraine for essentially my entire adult life. I took Russian in school, and then going to university, I did as well. But I lived in Russia as a student. Then I was living in Ukraine for a number of years. I mean, I've been going to Ukraine off and on since I was probably, I guess, 18 or 19. So I've been spending a lot of time there. But I worked in politics in Ukraine. In the case of Russia, I work with the democratic opposition to Putin. I continue to work with them. And I was thrown out of Russia in 2010 and out of Belarus at the same time, just due to the way the security systems work. But I spent, 5 years in Central Asia, in Kyrgyzstan. I was doing a lot of work in Kazakhstan as well. All these different things. Some of it was financed by the US government, the different programs they had to promote democracy. And other things were actually quite a bit different. It was just simply working with different political parties or political leaders.
Do you have happy memories of living in Russia, Jason?
And there were some happy moments. It's, getting at the airport. That was good. But it's a rough country. I mean, it was never a great place to be, I think, in a lot of ways. And at the same time, yes, of course, there was positives to living there and there's enjoyable moments. But it was a country that is a very difficult environment in which to live. It's quite harsh. I would say that it's not very outwardly welcoming. And I think at this point today, it's far different than when I was there. I was there more than 15 years ago. The country's changed substantially in that period of time. I mean, today I would never dream, never wish to go back to Russia. At that period of time, it was a different country. There was still a sense that something could be done positively. I don't think that's the case anymore.
Yeah. And in 2010, you got this ban from Russia. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Can you
Correct.
tell us about how that came about and how how you felt about that?
So I was working for the Democratic opposition to Putin, and so I got a notification when I applied for a work visa that due to the fact that it's a threat to national security of the Russian Federation, I was banned for life. And so, at the time, I was probably more bummed out because I thought this would limit the ability to get another job because I thought, well, now I'm out of this job, so what am I going to do next? But it was, in the grand scheme, it was all made for the better. I mean, it doesn't bother me now. I'm quite happy about it because I was ahead of the curve and realizing that Putin was a threat to humanity.
Yeah. When did you realize that, Jason? When can you remember the time where you thought, this guy is dangerous and he needs to be stopped as soon as possible.
Well, I started writing about the Russian democratic opposition in about 2005 or four. So this was actually pretty new in his term. I mean, this is still his first term. Maybe he's already in his second term when I was already starting to write about them. And I was already traveling to Ukraine about 2004 or five-ish. And back then, I was already starting to write about the idea that there could be Eastern Ukraine could be taken by Russia or be succeeded. So, I mean, this was a period of time that I think I already had pretty clear where history is leading us.
And now, of course, Jason, the world has become this very dangerous, worrying place. I don't, do you worry about the world, Jason, even with all your experience of working in these environments? I often speak to young people in my work as a parish priest, and lots of children worry about the future. Is it something that you kind of your experience enables you to worry less, or do you worry about things?
Yeah, I don't worry about things. I don't think there's a need to worry. I mean, things will turn out the way they're going to turn out. So there's no need to worry about it. It's obviously there's things that are concerning, that are alarming, but I would say it's quite a bit different than the sense of worry per se. I mean, I don't lose sleep about these things. So it's I receive death threats. I don't lose sleep about that either. So it's just life is full of mystery.
And your much of your work has been kind of being a political advisor. I wonder if you could advise the listeners first of all about Donald Trump. Is should we be worried about Donald Trump, particularly here in the West?
I think that we should be very concerned. Yes. I mean, I don't think I'd worry, but yes, I'd be concerned. Because I think he's doing a lot of things that are going to do great harm to the United States as well as to our European allies. Obviously, it's done great harm already to Ukraine and continue to do so. So that's quite unfortunate. And it's something that's, as I say, quite alarming. At the same time, as much as we wring our hands, how much influence do we have over what he's going to do? I think it's very, very limited. So I think that it's better to look at what we can do, whatever that is, and to focus on it because the reality is to worry about it's not going to make us any better off.
Do you think he's being well advised?
No, I think he's very ill-advised, and I think at the same time, the problem with him is probably just his ego more than anything else, that he doesn't take good advice if he gets it. I don't think he really wants to have, honest, serious critique of his logic or why he's doing what he wants. He wants to receive just praise that he's doing the right thing. I don't think he's seeking out people who are going to say to him, you could be doing this better.
And do you think that Putin is loving this? Do you think that he's kind of got Donald Trump where he wants him?
I think that, I think the Russians are very clear of the idea that Donald Trump at this point is probably overdone it. He's done too much to try to appease the Russians to make them happy. They've interpreted that probably as a weakness. And by interpret it as a weakness, accurately interpret it as a weakness, I think that's going to make them less likely to negotiate fair terms because they think that he'll just back down. And we saw already the negotiation efforts that he's put forward haven't worked out particularly well. And I think it's probably not going to get any better anytime soon.
Yeah. And how do the people in the States, we don't get a lot of that in our media and in our news, Jason. How the working class person on the streets of America react to Donald Trump. When we see clips of him, he himself, he almost plays himself as the Messiah, doesn't he? That he's the great hope for democracy and the West. But what's the reality from your point of view?
I think it's pretty divided. The United States is pretty split on Donald Trump. He's got about 47% support, 47% don't support, more or less, plus or minus a couple points. The fact is that I think that for the average citizen who supports him, they'll justify his actions, especially when it comes to things that are very secondary for them or tertiary, like Ukraine. They might have sympathies for Ukraine, but it's not a priority for them. And so when he does something that makes up for the balance, let's say deports a bunch of illegal immigrants, they say, well, that's great. See, that's what I voted for him for. Yeah, it's sort of unfortunate about Ukraine, but that was never my top priority. So he does appease them. I mean, he does make them happy. And so I think that, his numbers have declined substantially in the course of the last couple of months, about 7 percentage points, which is a lot. But at the same time, there's no reason to think there's some sort of popular rebellion against him. Those who didn't vote for him are usually, yes, rolling around and completely upset by this. But the fact is, for the average person, doesn't really care that much about politics first. But secondly, if they have any sympathies for him, they find the justification to continue supporting him.
And how much does peace in between Russia and Ukraine, how important is that to him? You know, when he was first elected, you know, he was kind of saying, I could bring peace to this if I was in charge. I'd bring peace in 3 days, I think, or whatever it was he said. You know, how essential is this to his future aspirations of what he wants to do more globally?
Well, that's where we got sort of unlucky, is that he took such a high personal interest in this, which is why I think things are turning out so badly. Things that he leaves to professionals usually don't turn out that badly, we saw in his first term. But once he personally takes an interest in something and begins to personally try to meddle in it, then it usually works out badly for us. So that's why, in the case of Ukraine, a topic that he's obviously has a great weakness in his knowledge of, I think he's doing a particularly bad job, mostly because he thinks he understands everything. It's his own, hubris, arrogance that's led him to this point. And that's why I think that it will get probably worse before it gets better. Um, there's no reason to think that Russia is going to go along with what he's suggesting. And quite the contrary, I think that they see the situation and realize that realistically, even if they went full out and tried to invade the rest of Ukraine, Donald Trump would probably take no action.
And what did you make of recent events where President Zelensky turned up at the White House and left very quickly after? I couldn't believe what I was watching.
That was pretty amazing. Yeah, it was pretty shocking. I mean, it was probably one of the most shocking things to see, wasn't it, as a political event? It was the first time, as far as I know, that any leader's been thrown out of the White House. It was pretty. It shows you. I mean, the underlying disdain that he has for Zelensky, and I think for Ukraine as a whole. I don't think he is a sincere broker in this. I don't think he's ever really cared about Ukraine. I don't think he really cares about the people there. None of this really matters to him. I think in the grand scheme, this is like a headache that he just wants to take a pill and make it go away. So if it means, giving away half of Ukraine, but it makes the problem go away, well, I'm fine with that. He just doesn't care. Fundamentally, he doesn't care.
That's quite it's quite a statement. He just doesn't care. Is that how you generally feel? He generally doesn't care.
I see no evidence that he does. I mean, I've never even heard a story or anecdotally that he's bothers to read reports about what's happening. He just fundamentally, if it turns out this way or that way, it's as I described to somebody recently. I said, it's like if somebody comes to fix your sink, you just say, fix the sink, please, and you hope they fix it. You're not asking for different variations in how it should be done or how it is. Just fix the sink. I don't really care how it's done. Just there's a problem. It doesn't work. Can you fix it? And that's all I want you to do. Fix it. Make it go away. Make the sink work. And his view towards Ukraine is pretty much the same. It's a problem. Someone's got to take care of it. If it means that we're going to lose half the country, or the people are going to be living under Russian imperialism, so be it. But now the problem's been fixed, and now I can say I did something that Joe Biden cannot do, and I'm a great hero because of it. And I deserve a Nobel Peace Prize.
And what's your assessment of the peace proposal? Is it you know, does it stack up? Are you comfortable with it? You know, again, we read about you know, billions of pounds being given up in minerals and whatnot. Is this a viable peace proposition?
No, I don't think the White House is serious. I mean, everything they proposed so far is sort of foolish. Um, at the most basic level, I'll cite an example, is that any sort of guarantee, any sort of contract has to have enforcement. So, so you take something to court if it doesn't work out, or if, you have to guarantee that it's going to be fulfilled. So in this case, it's the United States negotiating without Ukraine, without the Europeans. So who would be the enforcer of this? The United States is going to be further involved. Um, the Russians don't want to have peacekeepers, but the Europeans do want to have peacekeepers. So let's imagine, okay, we secede to the Russian demands and we have no peacekeepers. So that means that we're just going to have Russians standing there waiting to take Ukraine again. This is just absurd. That doesn't work. Okay, let's imagine we have peacekeepers. Okay, if there's going to be peacekeepers, they're not going to be Americans. They're going to be Europeans. But if they're Europeans, why are the Americans the ones negotiate the Russians as to what goes on? Why are we not even involving the Europeans? It doesn't even make any sense. Just fundamentally, this proposition doesn't even begin to add up. And even the mineral deal, which Trump hoped to make $500 billion, it's sort of absurd as well, because that was for weapons that the US had given to Ukraine. The total value is far less than 200 billion. It's far less. And when you look at the grand scheme of this, you go, where's he get these figures from? Why 500 billion? I think Trump wanted to be able to brag that he made money on this deal. Ukraine is desperate, so they're willing to sign over everything they have. It's sort of like a loan shark. And I think he likes that. I think that's how he views himself to be. So it is just absurd. There's been nothing good that's come of Trump so far with Ukraine.
And while all this hyperbole continues, what's the reality, Jason, for people in Ukraine and Russia for that matter? We don't really seem to get real statistics about lives lost and the real damage to the infrastructure of Ukraine. What can you tell us about that?
So in the case of Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, the part that's occupied, it has been substantially destroyed. Not all of it, of course, but a great deal. The areas near the front lines are pretty just beat up, pretty destroyed. But major cities like Kyiv or Odessa, there's some occasional buildings that have been struck, but it's not like there's like ruins everywhere. It's nothing like that, by far not. So the major cities are actually quite okay. When you consider it this way, Ukraine has an estimated 4 million people living in it. Sorry, Kiev has an estimated 4 million people living in it. The statistical probabilities of being actually struck by a missile are actually quite low. I mean, just in the number of missiles there are versus the number of people there are. So it would be almost impossible and unthinkable that Russia could ever try to take Kiev. Yet it appears that it's still their objective.
And what's your assessment of damage inflicted on the Russian side of the border? Is it a is it a devastating horizon as well? Have the Ukrainians caused much damage?
Within Russia, the territory of Russia, well, the Ukrainians only occupied Kursk Oblast, part of it, which is in southern Russia. I was there a few months ago. It didn't look like they destroyed a lot of things, and there's some buildings that have been hit, but there was not a lot of buildings that have been hit. Throughout Russia as a whole, though, there's virtually no damage. I mean, the only thing that's been struck routinely by the Ukrainians within Russia are the oil refineries. Those are routinely struck. But unfortunately, the Russians are quite good at rebuilding them, and most of them don't stay offline for more than a few months, as I recall.
And what about the longevity of President Zelensky? Is he in this for the long haul, or do you see a time kind of do you think it could be a short-term role for him to kind of agree a peace deal, and do you think he'll move on, or what's your assessment of that, Jason?
So once the war ends, I think that Zelensky will his term will also end. I mean, they'll have to have elections after the war ends because then there'll no longer be martial law, which martial law in Ukraine in the constitution prohibits elections to be held. So once there are elections, it'll be interesting to see if he runs again. I don't think he will, probably. I think he's probably burnt out. But if he does run, I think he'd also face a very challenging election. There's a lot of other people, namely military people, namely the former head of the military, former head of military intelligence as well, who are rumored to be thinking about running soon, whose popularity is extremely high. So I don't know. Looking at that, Zelensky might decide it's best to just sit it out and to be remembered for the period of the war than to run and lose. That'd be sort of a tragic way to end the career.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, Jason, about it is the Godcast. I'd like to ask a question about the church's role in the conflict in these two countries. If you could uh, share some of your knowledge. I mean, these are two profoundly religious cultures communities. What's the kind of role, if any, by the church, or are they pretty silent on these matters? I'm guessing maybe that in Russia they're just complicit and do what Putin instructs. Is that similar in Ukraine?
No, the Ukrainian, it's quite a bit different actually. In the case of Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church is part of the Russian government. I mean, Kirill, who's the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, is number 8 in the line of succession of Russia. And it's a state entity. So it's important to understand that. So they have a special prayer actually that then their services, which is specifically for Russia to win the war and stuff. So this is indoctrinalized part of the religion. So that does separate them quite a bit from most every other mainstream Christian sect. Um, and if you look at the Russians as a whole, they are not deeply religious. 0.8% of the Russian population, as of at least 15 years ago, regularly attend church services. 0.8. So, I mean, I think that a lot of people wear crosses and things like that. More than 50% of the population probably self-identify as Christian or Orthodox. But as far as an actual attribute of their lives, something that they reflect upon, it's non-existent and just non-existent. In the case of Ukraine, it is actually substantially more religious. And I think part of the reason is because one was more of a Ukraine specifically was an agricultural culture. Um, the big cities didn't have as much of an influence, so I think it maintained there and persisted more at a higher rate. And it's also different, is that Ukrainians are, I want to say it's 15% Catholic, a lot of Eastern Catholics, but they're Catholics. Then they have a very large segment that's obviously Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox. Now they have their own church, which has autonomy from the Russian Orthodox Church. And then you have the Protestants, and there's a surprisingly huge number of Protestants in Ukraine. And in fact, that's actually been a problem. Is that the Russians, when they occupy parts of Ukraine, eastern parts, they specifically target Protestants. The Orthodox, not so much. They don't really have such a problem with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Uh, they did a they did kidnap a few Catholic priests and torture them for more than a couple of years. But in the case of the Protestants, their cruelty is actually pretty unspeakable. It's pretty horrible. And it's because they seriously believe that it is a plot by the Americans to to actually spread spies around the world vis-a-vis this fake religion. And so the evangelicals especially get targeted. But all the other Protestant sects, choose Methodist or whoever, they'll definitely go after them because they consider it to be something that's a foreign influence that's there, not actually as a religion, that's a front, but the real reason is to spy.
Yeah. And Jason, one of the challenges I get as a priest is that religion is the root of all evil. Maybe a philosophical question. Do you believe that to be true, or do you think these are, and I've spoken to other people who've just said these are just proxy wars that are going on. These are people searching for their own piece of land to hold power over, etc., etc. What's your take on that?
Well, in the case of Ukraine, it's not religious based. I mean, in the case of the the Russian soldiers, um, they're presumably a majority would probably consider themselves to be Orthodox. Um, but see that no bearing in how, but what they do. I mean, they or seem to be very happy to go burn down Orthodox churches inside of Ukraine. So I don't think that it's actually tied to religion. I think it's. I mean, I don't see, and I literally see no tie to religion. That might be an exception, though, in the case of the Russian troops who are Muslims, which there was a lot of them, because they were usually singled out to do things that were considered to be particularly heinous, because they considered the ones who were not part of their religion not to be believers, and so they had less of a problem to do atrocities.
Yeah, one of the things that I don't agree with Donald Trump on many things, but on this, I wonder if he's got a legitimate argument. That he has said, hasn't he, that the America pumped billions and billions into this war, and meanwhile Europe has kind of done very little. Is that a legitimate argument? Is it time for for Western Europe to stand up and be counted, literally, and invest? And if there is to be peacekeepers, then it has to come from Europe and not from America.
Well, I mean, Europe definitely does have to take care of its own security, and that's for sure. And I think that is a very legitimate thing. I think he overstates the numbers in dramatic ways that are totally divorced from reality. But at the same time, it is clear that it's going to be clear for a long time that Europe really should take care of its own security. I mean, ultimately, the United States, this goes back to Obama's period, had a foreign policy decision that China, or I should say Asia, is going to be the larger priority due to China. And so the US is the only one that can really deal with China just due to its physical proximity to China versus the Europeans. It makes a lot more sense that the Europeans are focused on Russia and the Americans are more focused on China. Um, there is a logic to that I think is quite reasonable. The naval power of the United States is something that Europe can't ever have. So when you think of this, okay, it makes sense. The Americans are dealing with the Chinese, but the Europeans really haven't been picking it up a lot to do as much to defend themselves or to protect Ukraine as they could have been doing.
Yeah, you alluded to China there, Jason. What's you know, uh, what is the order of the in tray for Trump? Is it Ukraine and Russia? Is it China? Is it Taiwan? Is it Palestine and Israel? What's his remit, and what's your kind of? I'd be really interested to know, Jason, where the end game is all this. I do think about our young people, and for many years now, they've seen quite a violent global landscape. And do you see that calming down anytime, in the next 5, 10 years?
Well, I think that it's going to change. It usually evolves. Just remember, it wasn't too long ago we were all talking about ISIS and these sorts of groups, and today that's less of an issue. So these things do ebb and flow. At the same time, I think that the world is probably going to become Well, it's actually, I mean, and not because I'm favorable to Ukraine, but sincerely, I think that if Ukraine is beaten, it would be disastrous in consequences for the West for a number of reasons. One, I mean, I think Taiwan, that case is totally gone. I mean, if the Europeans and the Americans won't save Ukraine, which is much closer and much more of a direct national security threat to them, Taiwan's lost. And I think the consequences there get worse is that once those two tyrants, Putin and Xi, have been able to crush the near proximity, the nearby state, then we have the other strongmen in the world do very similar things probably. We'll see tyrants get worse because, we've already crossed the red line and nobody did anything. So why stop crossing red lines? And I think at that point, it's going to get actually much worse globally.
Yeah, and how important is the British government in all this, Jason? I was talking to somebody about politics on the Godcast a few weeks ago and saying, years ago we had Margaret Thatcher and we had Ronald Reagan, and they brought some sort of calmness to it all, and were very pivotal in bringing world peace around. What- is the British government still pivotal in these matters?
I think the British government's probably one of the most important. I mean, I would actually, it's probably the most important, actually, more than the Americans at this point. The fact is that Britain has been very strong in its support, very clear in its. And by the way, what I like about the British is that it's both the major political parties are quite clear about their support for Ukraine against Russian tyranny. And that's refreshing. The United States, unfortunately, it's devolved from that, where no longer do we look at tyranny and call it such, but instead we try to make friends with it.
Yes, it's been really enlightening. I mean, I've asked you lots of questions, and I didn't give you prior knowledge to these, but it's great. I think it's great for people to just hear it from somebody who's got the expertise. One thing I'd like to ask before we finish is an unrelated matter, but still quite tense, and that's between the United States of America, and Canada, and this idea that Trump said that he'd like Canada to be the 31st state, uh, and he's putting tariffs in left, right, and centre. I think Canada, for me, Canada is quite interesting because the king, the English monarch, is also the king of the Commonwealth, leader of the Commonwealth. In Canada, how do you see that playing out in the coming months and years?
So I don't think we're going to annex Canada for a lot of reasons. One, just because it's just so absurd. Why would you want to annex Canada? I think the reality, though, we should probably ask ourselves, why does Donald Trump do that? Why does he say things like this? Or occupying Greenland, or taking back the Panama Canal, or perhaps taking Mexico, he mentioned another time. But why does he really do that? So I think it's important to note that Donald Trump has a tendency whenever there's something in the news cycle going on that doesn't work out well for him, he goes off on these sort of strange tangents. So you notice just a few days ago that there was a phone call between Putin and Trump. And sure enough, what did Trump announce the evening before? That he's going to release all the documents on John F. Kennedy's assassination. And why was that? I'm pretty sure because when it happened, I said, oh, something's going to happen tomorrow. It's because whenever he feels that he might get bad press, he does something that's going to create even more press. So nobody talks about the bad press. Like the day he did the press conference about Greenland, there was a court ruling in New York against him. So he scheduled his press conference about Greenland for 2 hours, babbling on about it, to coincide exactly when the judge was reading the verdict in New York. But guess what? Not one newspaper in the United States covered the verdict in New York. They all talked about Greenland being annexed because it's much more salacious. So I think it's actually a communication strategy that he uses.
Thanks, Jason. And on a personal level, Jason, do you, as a journalist, you're not short of material, are you?
No, there's plenty going on. It doesn't get boring. So we have that going for us.
And did the Ukrainians enjoy, do they enjoy that kind of aspect? Learn, what is their, like you write for the Kyiv. Is that something they kind of hang on to? Do they use you as a useful form of information?
Sure. I mean, I in Ukraine, because I do speak the languages, I speak Russian and Ukrainian, is I probably, I don't know, 20 times a week go on television in Ukraine, maybe 15. So like this, I guess depends actually. Depends on the news cycle. Depends on this. So if Donald Trump does something really outlandish with Ukraine, there's a lot of demand. But if it's sort of quiet and Americans haven't done anything strange recently, there's less demand. But no, it's quite routine. It's because there's a high interest in America. There's a high interest in the UK. And it's funny, since you're British, I'll mention that the Ukrainians, for whatever reason, really like the British. It's something that they what is Britain or how they perceive Britain to be is something they have an extremely high opinion of, very positive opinion of. They really like it. So, and it's interesting because I don't know how they distinguish, say, British culture from American. For them, it's just English being spoken. Or how they, no, but they just very clearly distinguish between them. So it is very funny.
I think that is. I sometimes think, we have a number of Republicans in the UK, but I often, I'm a royalist. I'm very supportive of the monarchy, and I think maybe this is something to do with it. I think the king has got a role in all this, hasn't he?
Well, I think that, I mean, I agree with you. I think that, Americans also are very favorable to Brits in general. And and you ask an American who's never been outside the country before why they like it. I think it's a lot of things that would be the stereotype of what is Britain, right? The monarchy is definitely part of that, though. I mean, right? When they see that on TV, they see the pageantry of it all. I think that it appeals to them. The traditional British lifestyle, the housing, the tea time, and all this. This is something for them that's very appealing, and they think that's really interesting. And it's actually funny. There's a huge, I will say, and one other thing is that in Ukraine, you will see a lot of people are huge fans of Winston Churchill. Huge fans. I mean, quite often you will see things about Winston Churchill. He's got a very big following.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, Jason, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy man. I do appreciate it, and thanks for enlightening us a little bit around the situation in Russia and Ukraine. And thanks for coming on the Godcast.
Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me.
Thank you.